All right, next up we have securing our borders by the authority vested in me as president by the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America, including the Immigration and Nationality Act 8, USC 1101, and Section 301 of Title 3 United States Code, it is hereby ordered. Section 1, Purpose. Over the last 4 years, the United States has endured a large-scale invasion at an unprecedented level. Millions of illegal immigrants from nations and regions all around the world successfully entered the United States where they are now residing, including potential terrorists, foreign spies, members of cartels, gangs, and violent transnational criminal organizations and other hostile actors with malicious intent. Deadly narcotics and other illicit materials have flowed across the border, while agents and officers spend their limited resources processing illegal aliens for release into the United States. These catch and release policies undermine the rule of law and our sovereignty, creating substantial risks to public safety and security, and divert critical resources away from stopping the entry of contraband and fugitives into the United States. We have limited information on the precise whereabouts of a great number of these illegal aliens who have entered the United States over the last 4 years. This cannot stand. A nation without borders is not a nation, and the federal government must act with urgency and strength to end the threats posed by an unsecured border. One of my most important obligations is to protect the American people from the disastrous effects of unlawful mass migration and resettlement. My administration will marshal all available resources and authorities to stop this unprecedented flood of illegal aliens into the United States. Section 2, Policy. It is the policy of the United States to take all appropriate action to secure the borders of our nation through the following means. A. Establishing a physical wall and other barriers monitored and supported by adequate personnel and technology. B. Deterring and preventing the entry of illegal aliens into the United States. C. Detaining to the maximum extent authorized by law aliens apprehended on suspicion of violating federal or state law until such time as they are removed from the United States. D. Removing promptly all aliens who enter or remain in violation of federal law. E. Pursuing criminal charges against illegal aliens who violate the immigration laws and against those who facilitate their unlawful presence in the United States. F. Cooperating fully with state and local law enforcement officials in enacting federal-state partnerships to enforce federal immigration priorities. And G. Obtaining complete operational control of the borders of the United States. Section 3. Physical barriers. The Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of Homeland Security shall take all appropriate action to deploy and to construct temporary and permanent physical barriers to ensure complete operational control of the southern border of the United States. Section 4. Deployment of personnel. A. The Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of Homeland Security shall take all appropriate and lawful action to deploy sufficient personnel along the southern border of the United States to ensure complete operational control, and B. The Attorney General and the Secretary of Homeland Security shall take all appropriate action to supplement available personnel to secure the southern border and enforce the immigration laws of the United States through the use of sections 1103A2 and 4-6, or 4 through 6, I'm not sure which, of the INA A2 and 4-6. Section 5, Detention. The Secretary of Homeland Security shall take all appropriate actions to detain, to the fullest extent permitted by law, aliens apprehended for violations of immigration law until their successful removal from the United States. The Secretary shall, consistent with applicable law, issue new policy guidance or propose regulations regarding the appropriate and consistent use of lawful detention authority under the INA, including the termination of the practice known as catch and release, whereby illegal aliens are routinely released into the United States shortly after their apprehension for violations of immigration law. Section 6. Resumption of migrant protection protocols. As soon as practicable, the Secretary of Homeland Security, in coordination with the Secretary of State and the Attorney General, shall take all appropriate action to resume the migrant protection protocols in all sectors along the southern border of the United States and ensure that, pending removal proceedings. Aliens described in Section 235B-2C of the INA are returned to the territory from which they came. Section 7. Adjusting parole policies. The Secretary of Homeland Security shall, consistent with applicable law, take all appropriate action to a. Cease using the CBP-1 application as a method of paroling or facilitating the entry of otherwise inadmissible aliens into the United States. B. Terminate all categorical parole programs that are contrary to the policies of the United States established in my executive orders, including the program known as Processes for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans. C. Align all policies and operations at the southern border of the United States to be consistent with the policy of Section 2 of this order and ensure that all future parole determinations fully comply with this order and with applicable law. Section 8. Additional international cooperation. The Secretary of State, in coordination with the Attorney General and the Secretary of Homeland Security, shall take all appropriate action to facilitate additional international cooperation and agreements consistent with the policy of Section 2, including entering into agreements based upon the provisions of Section 208A2A of the INA or any other applicable provision of law. Section 9. DNA and identification requirements. A. The Attorney General and the Secretary of Homeland Security shall take all appropriate action to fulfill the requirements of the DNA Fingerprint Act of 2005, Title 10 of Public Law 109162 for all aliens detained under the authority of the United States, and B. The Secretary of Homeland Security shall take all appropriate action to use any available technologies and procedures to determine the validity of any claimed familial relationship between aliens encountered or apprehended by the Department of Homeland Security. Section 10. Prosecution of offenses. The Attorney General and the Secretary of Homeland Security shall take all appropriate action to prioritize the prosecution of offenses that relate to the borders of the United States, including the investigation and prosecution of offenses that involve human smuggling, human trafficking, child trafficking, and sex trafficking in the United States. Section 11. Additional measures. Within 14 days of the date of this order, Secretary of State, the Attorney General, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, and the Secretary of Homeland Security shall provide recommendations to the President regarding the use of any other authority to protect the United States from foreign threats and secure the southern border. And then we have general provisions in Section 12. And that was securing our borders. We are at putting people over fish, stopping radical environmentalism to provide water to Southern California. January 20th, 2025, Memorandum for the Secretary of Commerce, the Secretary of the Interior. Subject: putting people over fish, stopping radical environmentalism to provide water to Southern California. I hereby direct the Secretary of Commerce and Secretary of the Interior, in consultation with the heads of other departments and agencies of the United States as necessary, to immediately restart the work from my first administration by the National Marine Fisheries Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Bureau of Reclamation, and other agencies to route more water from the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta to other parts of the state for use by the people there who desperately need a reliable water supply. During my first term, the state of California, at the direction of its governor, filed a lawsuit to stop my administration from implementing improvements to California's water structure. My administration's plan would have allowed enormous amounts of water to flow from the snowmelt and rainwater in rivers in Northern California to beneficial use in the Central Valley and Southern California. This catastrophic halt was allegedly in protection of the Delta smelt and other species of fish. Today, this enormous water supply flows wastefully into the Pacific Ocean. The recent deadly and historically destructive wildfires in Southern California underscore why the state of California needs a reliable water supply and sound vegetation management practices in order to provide water desperately needed there, and why this plan must immediately be re-implemented. Within 90 days of the date of this memorandum, the Secretary of Commerce and Secretary of the Interior shall report to me regarding the progress made in implementing the policies in this memorandum and provide any recommendations regarding future implementation. And that was putting people over fish, stopping radical environmentalism to provide water to Southern California. And now we are on restoring the death penalty and protecting public safety. By the authority vested in me as president by the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America, it is hereby ordered. Section 1. Purpose. Capital punishment is an essential tool for deterring and punishing those who would commit the most heinous crimes and acts of lethal violence against American citizens. Before, during, and after the founding of the United States, our cities, states, and country have continuously relied upon capital punishment as the ultimate deterrent and only proper punishment for the vilest crimes. Our founders knew well that only capital punishment can bring justice and restore order in response to such evil. For this and other reasons, capital punishment continues to enjoy broad popular support. Yet, for too long, politicians and judges who oppose capital punishment have defied and subverted the laws of our country. At every turn, they seek to thwart the execution of lawfully imposed capital sentences and choose to enforce their own personal beliefs instead of law. At every turn, they seek to thwart the execution of lawfully imposed capital sentences and choose to enforce their personal beliefs rather than the law. When President Biden took office in 2021, he allowed his Department of Justice to issue a memorandum. I'm so used to saying memorandum at this point. When President Biden took office in 2021, he allowed his Department of Justice to issue a moratorium on federal executions in defiance of his duty to faithfully execute the laws of the United States that provide for capital punishment. And on December 23, 2024, President Biden commuted the sentences of 37 of the 40 most vile and sadistic rapists, child molesters, and murderers on federal death row. Remorseless criminals who brutalized young children, strangled and drowned their victims, and hunted strangers for sport. He commuted their sentences even though the laws of our nation have always protected victims by applying capital punishment to barbaric acts like theirs. Judges who oppose capital punishment have likewise disregarded the law by falsely claiming that capital punishment is unconstitutional, even though the Constitution explicitly acknowledges the legality of capital punishment. These efforts to subvert and undermine capital punishment defy the laws of our nation, make a mockery of justice, and insult the victims of these horrible crimes. The government's most solemn responsibility is to protect its citizens from abhorrent acts, and my administration will not tolerate efforts to stymie and eviscerate the laws that authorize capital punishment against those who commit horrible acts of violence against American citizens. Section 2. Policy. It is the policy of the United States to ensure that the laws that authorize capital punishment are respected and faithfully implemented, and to counteract the politicians and judges who subvert the law by obstructing and preventing the execution of capital sentences. Section 3. Federal capital punishment. A. The Attorney General shall pursue the death penalty for all crimes of a severity demanding its use. B. In addition to pursuing the death penalty where possible, the Attorney General shall, where consistent with applicable law, pursue federal jurisdiction and seek the death penalty regardless of other factors for every federal crime involving 1. The murder of a law enforcement officer, or 2. A capital crime committed by an alien illegally present in this country. The Attorney General shall encourage state attorneys general and district attorneys to bring state capital charges for all capital crimes with special attention to the crimes described in subsections 1 and 2, regardless of whether the federal trial results in a capital sentence. D. The Attorney General shall take all appropriate action to modify the Justice Manual based on the policy and purpose set forth in this executive order. E. The Attorney General shall evaluate the places of imprisonment and conditions of confinement for each of the 37 murderers whose federal death sentences were commuted by President Biden. and the Attorney General shall take all lawful and appropriate action to ensure that these offenders are imprisoned in conditions consistent with the monstrosity of their crimes and the threats they pose. The Attorney General shall further evaluate whether these offenders can be charged with state capital crimes and shall recommend appropriate action to state and local authorities. Section 4. Preserving capital punishment in the states. A. The Attorney General shall take all necessary and lawful action to ensure that each state that allows capital punishment has a sufficient supply of drugs needed to carry out lethal injection. B. The Attorney General shall take all appropriate action to approve or deny any pending requests for certification made by any state under 28 U.S.C. 2265. Section 5. Seeking the overruling of Supreme Court precedents that hinder capital punishment. The Attorney General shall take all appropriate action to seek the overruling of Supreme Court precedents that limit the authority of state and federal governments to impose capital punishment. Section 6. Prosecuting crime to protect communities. A. The Attorney General shall appropriately prioritize public safety and the prosecution of violent crime, and take all appropriate action necessary to dismantle transnational criminal activity in the United States. B. To ensure the fullest protection of American communities from violence, the Attorney General shall encourage state attorneys general and district attorneys to adopt policies and practices aligned with subsection A. Federal law enforcement should coordinate with state and local law enforcement where possible to facilitate these objectives. And then we have general provisions on section 7. All right, we are on promoting beautiful federal civic architecture. January 20th, 2025, a memorandum for the Administrator of the General Services Administration. Subject: promoting beautiful federal civic architecture. I hereby direct the Administrator of the General Services Administration, in consultation with the Assistant to the President for Domestic Policy and the heads of departments and agencies of the United States where necessary, to submit to me within 60 days recommendations to advance the policy that federal public buildings should be visually identifiable as civic buildings and respect regional, traditional, and classical architectural heritage in order to uplift and beautify public spaces and ennoble the United States and our system of self-government. Such recommendations shall consider appropriate revisions to the guiding principles for federal architecture and procedures for incorporating community input into federal building design selections. If, before such recommendations are submitted, the Administrator of the General Services Administration proposes to approve a design for a new federal public building that diverges from the policy set forth in this memorandum, the Administrator shall notify me through the Assistant to the President for Domestic Policy not less than 30 days before the General Services Administration could reject such design without incurring substantial expenditures. Such notification shall set forth the reasons the Administrator proposes to approve such design. And that was promoting beautiful federal civic architecture. We are on restoring accountability for career senior executives. January 20th, 2025, memorandum for the heads of executive departments and agencies. Subject: restoring accountability for career senior executives. Career senior executive service officials are charged to ensure that the executive management of the government of the United States is responsive to the needs, policies, and goals of the nation, and otherwise is of the highest quality, as required by Section 3131 of Title V United States Code. SES officials have enormous influence over the functioning of the federal government and thus the well-being of hundreds of millions of Americans. As the Constitution makes clear, and as the Supreme Court of the United States has reaffirmed, the executive power, all of it, is vested in a president who must take care that the laws be faithfully executed. Sela Law LLC v. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau 591 U.S. 197-203-2020. Because no single person could fulfill that responsibility alone, the framers expected the president would rely on subordinate officers for assistance. The president's power to remove subordinates is a core part of the executive power vested by vested by Article 2 of the Constitution, and is necessary for the President to perform his duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. Because SES officials wield significant governmental authority, they must serve at the pleasure of the President. Only that chain of responsibility ensures that SES officials are properly accountable to the President and the American people. If career SES officials fail to faithfully fulfill their duties to advance the needs, policies, and goals of the United States, the President must be able to rectify the situation and ensure that the entire executive branch faithfully executes the law. For instance, SES officials who engage in unauthorized disclosure of executive branch deliberations violate the constitutional rights of Americans, refuse to implement policy priorities, or perform their duties inefficiently or negligently should be held accountable. The President must be able to trust that the executive branch will work together in service of the nation. My administration will restore a government of the people, by the people, for the people. Therefore, A. Within 30 days of the signing of this memorandum, the Director of the Office of Personnel Management, in coordination with the Director of the Office of Management and Budget, shall issue SES performance plans that agency must adopt. B. Agency heads, who along with their senior staff manage career SES officials as one of their core functions, shall use all available authorities to reinvigorate the SES system and prioritize accountability. C. Each agency head shall, as necessary and appropriate and consistent with the procedural requirements of Section 3395 of Title V United States Code, reassign agency SES members to ensure their knowledge, skills, abilities, and mission assignments are optimally aligned to implement my agenda. D. Each agency head should terminate its existing Executive Resources Board, institute a new or interim ERB, and assign senior non-career officials to chair and serve on the board as a majority alongside career members. E. Each agency head should terminate its existence performance review board membership and reconstitute membership with individuals committed to full enforcement of SES performance evaluations that promote and assure an SES of the highest caliber. And F. Any agency head who becomes aware of an SES official whose performance or continued occupancy of the position is inconsistent with either the principles reaffirmed in this order or their duties to the nation under Section 3131 of Title V United States Code shall immediately take all appropriate actions, up to and including the removal of that official. With the support of OPM and OMB, restoring an accountable government workforce is a top priority of my administration. And that was restoring accountability for career senior executives.